Portraits Prey. Chapter 1. The morning light streamed in through the curtains, stirring Emma from her restless sleep. She blinked slowly, orienting herself to the familiar surroundings of the bedroom. The first moments of waking were always the most peaceful, before reality came crashing back in. She turned her head to look at the still figure lying next to her. Jacob's chest rose and fell gently, the only indication that he still clung to life. His paralyzed body remained frozen, just as it had been for the past 6 months since the accident. Emma swallowed down the lump in her throat. "Good morning, my love," she whispered, knowing he couldn't respond. She sat up and slowly moved the covers off of herself. Every muscle ached from another night spent on the hard mattress next to the hospital bed. But she wouldn't sleep anywhere else. Her place was by his side. She stood up and walked over to the windows, drawing back the heavy curtains. Pale gray light filtered into the room. It looked like it might be a sunny autumn day, not that Jacob would know the difference. Emma moved about the room, turning on lights and getting dressed for the day ahead. She dreaded the hours stretching before her, filled with the monotony of caring for a man who could do nothing for himself. But she tried to stay positive for Jacob's sake. After changing Jacob's clothes and bedsheets, Emma settled into the rocking chair beside him. "Let's put some music on, shall we?" she said brightly. She turned on the radio, letting the melody of classical music fill the void. Emma stared out the window, watching the wind rustle through the changing leaves. How she yearned to take Jacob outside, to feel the sun on their faces and the grass beneath their feet. But his wheelchair couldn't traverse the uneven ground surrounding their secluded farmhouse. This helplessness and isolation gnawed at her. She desperately missed the life they had shared before the accident. The trips into town together, lazy Sundays spent reading in bed, evening walks around their land. It was all gone now, every joy and freedom stripped away. The music switched to an upbeat pop song about finding hope in dark times. Emma quickly switched it off, the message feeling almost cruel given her circumstances. She turned back to Jacob, gently squeezing his limp hand. "I'm still here, my darling. I'll always be right here." Chapter 2. Emma heated a can of chicken noodle soup on the stove, staring absently out the kitchen window as she stirred. She realized she hadn't left the house in over a week except to get the mail. The days seemed to blur together in a haze of monotony, filled with the tasks of caring for Jacob. She missed the weekly grocery shopping trips into town, when she and Jacob would hold hands down the quaint village streets, popping into shops and chatting with locals. Now she had deliveries brought to the house, so she never had to leave his side. But the isolation wore on her. Emma brought the soup and some crackers up to the bedroom on a tray, along with Jacob's daily medications. She found him gazing vacantly out the window, just as she had left him. Emma swallowed back the tears stinging her eyes as she settled down to feed him. "Remember how we talked about taking a trip to the Mediterranean once you're retired?" she said, spooning some soup into his unmoving mouth. "We were going to eat our weight in fresh seafood by the coast and drink wine during sunsets on the beach." Emma dabbed Jacob's mouth with a napkin, lost in her memories. "I know you probably can't really hear me, darling, but I hope you can still dream of the life we hoped for together, one filled with joy and possibility." She finished feeding him, gave him his medications, then settled back into the rocking chair. Emma closed her eyes, wishing she could will away this nightmare they found themselves trapped in. That she could turn back time to before the accident, when life still held promise. Emma must have dozed off, because suddenly she felt herself jolt awake. For a fleeting moment, she forgot where she was. But reality came crashing back when she saw Jacob lying prone and silent. She stood up and walked over to him, gently stroking his head. His eyes stared vacantly ahead, seeing nothing. But she continued talking to him just the same. "Oh, my love, I just want to see you smile again. To hear your voice, I'd give anything." Her voice broke off in a sob. She laid her head down on his chest, listening to the faint heartbeat within. Still clinging to life, though just barely. Emma knew nothing could undo the damage the accident had wrought. But she would spend every remaining moment trying to bring even the smallest bit of light back into Jacob's dark world. She would be the candle to guide him, no matter how difficult the journey ahead. Chapter 3. Emma hurried up the attic stairs, coughing at the thick cloud of dust her footsteps stirred up. She switched on the single dangling light bulb, illuminating the cramped space filled with furniture, boxes, and draped sheets. She shuffled past old steamer trunks and a dress form to the far side of the attic. Her hands shook slightly as she grasped the top of the large object leaning against the wall. Emma slowly pulled the sheet off, revealing the portrait underneath. It was a life-sized painting of Jacob, so expertly done it nearly looked like a photograph. He was depicted out in their wheat field, leaning on a pitchfork with the farmhouse in the distance. His tanned face wore a relaxed grin, blue eyes gazing warmly at the viewer. Seeing his vitality captured on canvas just before the accident twisted Emma's heart. She had secretly commissioned the local artist to paint it as a gift for Jacob, hoping it would lift his spirits. But when she saw the finished portrait, she couldn't bring herself to hang it where he would see it daily. A reminder of everything he had lost. So she hid it away in the attic instead. "What am I going to do with you?" Emma murmured. She reached out and touched the detailed brushstrokes forming Jacob's face. The artist had been eager to paint such a handsome subject. Maybe too eager in retrospect. Emma didn't know exactly when she first started noticing something strange about the portrait. A sense that Jacob's eyes seemed to follow her sometimes. That the friendly grin appeared twisted, almost mocking. She tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light. But the portrait's presence increasingly unsettled her. She jumped back with a gasp now as the floorboard creaked behind her. Emma's heartbeat hammered in her ears as she stared at the spot where she thought she saw Jacob's painted lips curl into a sneer. "Just my imagination," she muttered, throwing the sheet back over the portrait. But she still found herself trotting downstairs faster than was safe. Back in the warmly lit kitchen, Emma tried to shrug off the encounter. But a nagging intuition told her the portrait possessed a malevolent energy, though she couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was foolish superstition. But she would keep the thing hidden away rather than taking chances. Emma resolved not to go near it again as she set about making dinner, trying to ignore her lingering unease. Later that night, however, she woke with a start, feeling a strange static charge in the air. The wind howled outside, making the old house creak and groan. As she lay in the darkness, Emma thought she heard the sound of footsteps dragging up the attic stairs. Impossible, of course. No one else was in the house. Unless the portrait had somehow come to sinister life. She pulled the blankets tight around herself, heartbeat racing. "Just the wind," she whispered into the darkness. But she knew she wouldn't sleep again that night. Chapter 4. Emma stood at the kitchen sink, gazing sightlessly out the window as she washed the breakfast dishes. The sound of gravel crunching drew her attention to a car pulling up the long driveway. She brightened when she recognized her sister Alice's red sedan. It had been nearly 2 weeks since her last visit. Emma always appreciated Alice making the 45-minute drive out to their secluded farmhouse to check on them. Though at only 26 years old, Alice still had a youthful social life to enjoy in the city rather than being trapped playing nursemaid. Emma plastered on a smile as she heard Alice knock before letting herself in. "Hey sis, I'm in the kitchen," she called out. Alice appeared in the doorway, pretty as ever with her bobbed chestnut hair and colorful retro dress. "There you are, sorry I haven't been by lately. Work's been a zoo," she said, giving Emma a quick hug. "No need to apologize. I know you have your own life." Emma resumed washing dishes, blinking back the reflexive tears Alice's visits always brought on lately. She was just so grateful not to be alone. Alice's gaze drifted around the room, taking in the wilting floral centerpiece and perpetual state of disorder. "The place is looking homey," she said lightly. "How are you holding up, though? Is Jacob about the same?" Emma's forced smile faltered slightly. "No real changes, but we're managing just fine." She quickly redirected the conversation to Alice's life while they ate lunch, not wanting to dwell on her and Jacob's bleak reality. Afterwards, Emma brought up a slice of coffee cake she had baked. Alice took a bite and closed her eyes with pleasure. "Amazing as always. You really should open a bakery someday." Emma let out a sad little laugh. "Sure, I'll get right on that. The Homebound Homemaker's Bakery." Alice's face fell. "Oh, Emma, I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking." She reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. "I know things seem impossible now, but it will get better. You have to believe that." Emma just nodded silently, not trusting herself to speak. After finishing her coffee, Alice left to get back to the city, promising to come again soon. Emma stood watching from the porch as the car disappeared down the drive. She was touched by Alice's attempts at optimism, but her reassurances rang hollow when every day felt like immutable darkness. With a deep breath, Emma turned to head back inside and resume her solitary vigil over Jacob. Chapter 5. Emma gripped the steering wheel tightly as she navigated the winding rural highway. Gray clouds scudded across the late afternoon sky, threatening rain. The radio played softly in the background, but Emma scarcely heard it, preoccupied with her mission. She was on her way into town to meet with the artist who had painted Jacob's portrait, a secret she had kept even from Alice. Emma didn't know exactly what she hoped to achieve, only that she had to do something. The portrait's disturbing presence could no longer be ignored. As the scattered buildings of town came into view, Emma mentally rehearsed what she might say. That she had noticed odd things about the painting. That she wondered if he had imbued it with any unknown energies. She wanted him to take the thing back and out of their lives. Emma knew these suspicions would sound irrational. The artist would surely think her grief-stricken mind was imagining things. But she had awoken too many nights in sheer terror from nightmares about the portrait coming to sinister life. His assurances that it was just an ordinary painting would provide some relief from her gnawing fear. She parked along the town's main street and hurried down the sidewalk to the red brick building housing the artist's studio. Emma jogged up 2 flights of stairs to his unit, hesitating just a moment before knocking firmly on the scratched wooden door. She heard footsteps approach before the door swung open, revealing the artist. David, she recalled his name was. He was tall and rail-thin, with shaggy gray hair and a colorful woven shirt. He looked momentarily puzzled to see her, until recognition lit up his pale blue eyes. "Emma, what a nice surprise." He stepped back and motioned her inside. "What brings you all the way into town?" Emma crossed the threshold into the studio, gazing around at the half-finished canvases and cluttered work table. "Thanks for seeing me without notice," she began hesitantly. "I wanted to talk to you about the portrait you did of my husband." David nodded. "Of course, I was so happy to capture Jacob's spirit on canvas. I hope the painting helped lift his mood." There was a knowing glint in the artist's eyes that made Emma wonder if he had guessed her intentions. She shifted uneasily. "Well, actually, I never ended up showing it to him. I've kept it hidden away." Emma went on to haltingly express her misgivings about the portrait, feeling the artist staring intently at her. When she finished, David was silent for a long moment. Finally, he stepped forward and put a hand on her shoulder. "Emma, it's just a painting. I think your mind is playing tricks on you." He gave her a pitying look. "Grief can be very difficult." Emma opened her mouth to protest, but faltered. Hearing the words aloud did make her suspicions seem fanciful. Perhaps it was all in her head. She finally just nodded mutely and left the studio, unsure whether she felt relieved or foolish. But she decided to keep the portrait locked away regardless, just to be safe. Chapter 6. Emma sliced carrots for dinner, trying to shake off the lingering unease from her trip to town. She had busied herself with household chores upon returning, hoping the activity would calm her restless mind. But she couldn't stop dwelling on the conversation with the artist. He had dismissed her concerns so readily, as if speaking to a troubled child. Logically, Emma knew a painting was just an assemblage of harmless paint and canvas. But her instincts told her this portrait somehow posed a threat she couldn't articulate. She was startled from her thoughts by a sudden loud crash from upstairs. Heart-lurching, Emma grabbed a kitchen knife and hurried from the room before she could second-guess herself. As she climbed the stairs, she heard another heavy thud. The noises were coming from inside the closed attic door at the top of the stairs. With a trembling hand, Emma slowly turned the doorknob and pushed the door open. More crashing sounds echoed down into the dark, dusty space. "Hello," she called out shakily. "Is someone there?" Silence greeted her. Emma fumbled along the wall, searching for the light switch, struggling to steady her rapid breaths. With a flick of the switch, the attic was illuminated, revealing it to be empty. Emma took a few tentative steps inside, looking around warily. Nothing appeared disturbed. The sheets still lay neatly draped over the leaning portrait. "You're losing it, Emma," she muttered to herself. Just then, another crash rang out, followed by what sounded like a sinister low laugh. Emma cried out, chest constricting in fear. Before she even realized what she was doing, she rushed forward and ripped the sheet off the portrait. Jacob's painted eyes seemed to stare right at her with a malevolent glint. The lips curled back over the teeth in a snarl. Emma stumbled backwards, heart dropping into her stomach. This was no trick of her imagination. The painting was animate and fully sentient. Emma let the sheet fall back over the portrait as she fled the attic. She slammed the door shut, leaning back against it, gasping. The thing was alive, she was certain of it now. And it meant them harm. As darkness fell outside, Emma locked herself in the bedroom with Jacob, jumping at every creak. She clutched the kitchen knife tightly, unable to stop imagining the portrait descending the stairs on ghostly legs to terrorize them. A logical inner voice tried to argue none of this could be real. But the conviction that some malevolent entity had inhabited the painting kept growing stronger. Emma knew she would get no rest. The painting had revealed its diabolical plan, and she was utterly helpless. Chapter 7. Emma jolted awake in the gray pre-dawn light, momentarily confused to find herself propped up stiffly in the rocking chair. Bleary recognition came to her. She had kept her vigil all night over Jacob's bedside, knife still clutched tightly in her lap. The ominous reality of the menacing portrait came flooding back. She shuddered, remembering the previous night's bizarre events. Whatever dark forces inhabited that painting, she knew one thing for certain: she had to protect Jacob at all costs. Emma stood and stretched her painfully cramped muscles. Jacob continued to sleep peacefully, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. She was desperate to shield him from the evil lurking under their very roof. But how could she fight such an inexplicable evil? She crept upstairs, knife still gripped tightly. Outside the attic door, Emma hesitated, feeling an almost electric charge in the air, as if some dark energy were pulsing from within. Finally, she turned the handle and pushed the door open. The attic looked just as deserted as the night before in the early morning light filtering through the window. Keeping her back pressed against the wall, Emma sidled around stacks of furniture and trunks until she reached the leaning portrait. After taking a deep breath, she yanked the sheet off. Jacob's likeness gazed back at her, his painted features relaxed. Just an ordinary portrait. Emma slowly released the breath she had been holding. Had she imagined everything after all? "What are you?" she murmured, leaning closer to examine the detailed brushstrokes. Emma reached out a trembling hand to touch the still face on the canvas. Suddenly, the painted eyes snapped to meet hers, flashing with malevolence. Emma cried out and stumbled back as a deep, sinister laugh echoed through the attic. The portrait's lips twisted into a snarling grin, the painted hands clenching into claws. Heart pounding wildly, Emma threw the sheet back over the picture frame and raced downstairs, slamming the attic door after her. She knew without doubt now that the portrait was possessed by an evil spirit. She had to find a way to destroy it before it could harm Jacob. But how could she fight against such a supernatural enemy? Emma paced the living room, her mind racing. An inner voice tried to tell her none of this could be real paintings, didn't come to life or laugh or snarl. But her gut knew what she had witnessed. She considered fleeing the house with Jacob, seeking refuge anywhere the portrait couldn't haunt them. But their isolated farm had been Jacob's family home for generations. How could she take him away now that he lay helpless? No, Emma realized, this was her battle to fight. Whatever malignant forces had inhabited the canvas, her love for Jacob gave her the power to defeat them. She would delve through the occult books in the basement and learn what it took to destroy the evil portrait. With Jacob's very soul at stake, Emma felt a ferocious surge of resolve. She would fight with every ounce of strength she had left. Armed with holy water and incantations, Emma would face the animate portrait again at nightfall. And this time, only one of them would leave the confrontation intact. She had crossed over into feral Mama Bear territory. For Jacob, no sacrifice was too great, even her sanity itself. Emma took the old wooden crucifix down from the living room wall. Faith had never come easily to her, but now she whispered a desperate prayer. To hold back this all-consuming darkness threatening to devour them whole. The next hours passed in a blur as Emma prepared herself mentally and spiritually. She knew a battle unlike any other lay ahead tonight, but she would gladly walk through the fires of hell to protect her husband. When night draped its dark mantle over the farmhouse once more, Emma stood ready. Clutching her crucifix, a book of incantations and vial of holy water, she climbed the creaking stairs. The evil awaited, but she approached with head held high, propelled by a mother's love. The time had come to face the portrait's sinister plan head-on, no matter the cost. Chapter 8. The morning sun shone brightly through the bedroom windows as Emma helped the nurse get Jacob washed and dressed. She had the local home care service come by a few hours each morning, though she still handled the rest of his daily needs alone. Emma was grateful for the brief respite. Once Jacob was settled comfortably in his wheelchair by the window, Emma headed downstairs to tidy up and prepare lunch before the nurse left. She paused in the living room, gaze drawn to the framed photograph on the mantel. It had been taken at a picnic the previous summer, showing Jacob grinning up at her under the shade trees. He had tackled her playfully right after it was taken, sending them both tumbling into the grass laughing. The memory sent a fresh ache through her heart. Just then, the front door burst open, making Emma jump. Alice breezed in, clutching a bakery box and looking uncharacteristically excited. "They had your favorite lemon tarts in stock today, so I grabbed a few," Alice said. "Was that the home nurse I passed on the way in? I can come back later if you're busy." "No, it's fine," she just left, Emma said, hoping she didn't look as haggard as she felt. She hadn't been sleeping lately thanks to her episodes confronting the portrait. Alice followed her into the kitchen, chatting brightly about her week as Emma prepared a simple pasta lunch. After eating, Alice popped back up carrying the dirty dishes. "Let me help clean up at least. You already have your hands full," she insisted cheerfully. Emma managed a tired smile. "Thanks. I'm so lucky to have you." After washing the dishes, Alice glanced at the time. "Shoot, I should get going soon, but first, can we go peeking on Jacob? I haven't even said hi yet." "Of course," Emma said, leading the way upstairs. Jacob sat right where they had left him, gazing vacantly out at the trees. Alice took his limp hand, speaking words of encouragement that he couldn't acknowledge. Emma waited in the doorway, wishing she could will some spark back into his eyes. After squeezing Jacob's hand, Alice turned to leave, but paused. "Hey, Em, what's that big covered picture frame leaning against the wall there?" Emma tensed. "Oh, nothing, just some old painting." Before she could protest further, Alice lifted the sheet off the portrait. "Wow," she breathed, taking in the lifelike depiction of Jacob. Then her eyes narrowed. Wait, his face, did it just move? "You're imagining things," Emma said hastily, throwing the sheet back over it. But a spark of hope flared within her. If someone else was noticing strange phenomena, she couldn't be losing her mind. Alice gave her a searching look before following her from the room. Emma's pulse raced. She wasn't just taking on the fight alone anymore. Chapter 9. Emma sat curled up on the living room sofa, cradling a cup of chamomile tea. The hot liquid soothed her raw nerves, though it couldn't eliminate the bone-deep exhaustion. Dark circles stood out sharply below her bloodshot eyes. Sleep continued to evade her despite the prescription sleep aids. She dozed fitfully at best, jolting awake multiple times each night at imagined sounds. The encounters with the animate painting had left her frayed psyche unable to find any rest. Part of Emma wondered if she should confess what was happening to Alice. Having her sister witness the portrait seemingly move had provided some validation that she wasn't descending into madness. But Emma still feared Alice would chalk it up to stress and grief playing tricks on her mind. With a weary sigh, she uncurled herself from the sofa and shuffled to the kitchen to rinse out her mud. As she stood gazing absently out the window above the sink, she noticed a figure coming up the driveway. Emma squinted for a moment before recognizing the artist, David. Her shoulders tensed. What could he possibly want now? Emma opened the door as he raised his hand to knock. "Hello, David," she said guardedly. "What brings you out this way?" He gave her an apologetic smile. "I hope you don't mind me dropping in unannounced. I wanted to check in and see how you were doing after our conversation the other day." Emma hesitated before stepping back to let him inside. She led the way to the living room and perched stiffly on the edge of the sofa. Might as well hear him out. David settled into the armchair across from her. "Emma, I know things have been very difficult for you since the accident," he began gently. "But I'm concerned. Your behavior the other day was troubling, to say the least." Emma bristled but stayed silent as he continued. "I think your distressed mind is playing tricks on you. I know grief can warp our perceptions, but you need to maintain your grip on reality right now." He leaned forward, expression earnest. "That painting is just oil on canvas, but if it distresses you, I can take it back. I only hope you get the help you need." Emma opened her mouth to argue, but realized anything she said would only cement his conviction she was unstable. Defeated resentment simmered within her, but she simply nodded. "I'll survive," she said tonelessly. David looked mildly relieved as they walked to the door and said stiff goodbyes. Emma remained rooted in place even after his car disappeared down the drive. She had never felt more alone. If even the artist didn't believe her, what hope did she have fighting this battle? But she had no choice but to keep waging the war alone. Chapter 10. Emma descended the creaking basement stairs, the single exposed bulb doing little to dispel the gloom. She walked past old holiday decorations and dusty furniture to the back corner piled high with cardboard boxes. Kneeling down, she began rifling through their contents by the dim light. Mostly just old clothes and knickknacks from another lifetime. Then, in one box, her fingers grasped cracked leather Jacob's grandfather's journals. She had stumbled upon them years ago, but never been able to decipher the faded, scrawling handwriting. Now she prayed they contained some wisdom or occult secrets that could help her. Emma brought the stack of musty journals upstairs and cleared a space on the kitchen table. As she paged through them, she could make out references to charms, spirits, and portents. But the arcane symbols and spells were beyond her comprehension. She needed reference books to make sense of them. After checking briefly on Jacob, Emma got in the car and headed for the library in town. She scoured the shelves, finding a few texts on the occult and demonology. Hardly definitive guides, but they were a start. She checked them out along with some witchcraft books for good measure. Once home, she brewed a pot of strong coffee and settled in at the table to study her materials. Hour by hour, she paged through the books, pausing to scribble down any rituals, artifacts, or prayers that might help combat the malevolent portrait. Dusk faded into night outside as she filled page after page with frantic notes. When weariness blurred her vision, Emma headed upstairs to try and sleep, though she knew it would elude her. She peeked into Jacob's room to check on him before continuing down the hall to their bedroom. But as her hand grasped the doorknob, Emma heard faint creaking sounds coming from inside the room. Her breath caught in her throat. Gripping her crucifix necklace, she turned the knob and pushed the door open slowly. The room appeared empty, just shadows cast by the moonlight outside the windows. But there a dark shape by the far wall snatched back behind the dresser. Heart pounding, Emma fumbled along the wall for the light switch, blinking as the overhead fixture flickered on. She stumbled back with a gasp. There on the wall hung the portrait, its painted eyes glinting with malice. Dark viscous fluid seeped down the canvas like blood. Emma screamed as the painted lips curled into a vicious grin. Then she blinked, and it was gone. Just a blank space on the wall where she had imagined it. Emma collapsed onto the bed, shaking violently. Sleep would not come tonight. All that existed was her obsession to destroy the watchful evil. Chapter 11. Alice sat sideways on the sofa, with her legs tucked under her, sipping a glass of red wine. Some mindless reality show played on the television, though she was barely paying attention. It had been another long week at the publishing house where she worked, filled with office politics and frustrating meetings. She set her wine glass down on the coffee table next to the bottle and leaned her head back, closing her eyes. Peace and quiet was all she craved right now. Though a nagging thought entered her mind. Not for the first time recently, she should have driven out to Emma's today to check on her. The past few visits, Emma had seemed withdrawn and on edge. Understandable, of course, given everything she was dealing with. But Alice sensed something more troubling lurking beneath the surface. She felt guilty for not making the effort to visit her sister more regularly. With a sigh, Alice opened her eyes and reached for her cell phone. She typed out a quick text. "Hey, I'm sorry I didn't make it out there today. Is everything okay? Thinking of you. Let me know if you need anything at all. Love you." She set the phone back down and turned her attention back to the inane reality show. But after just a few minutes, her phone screen lit up with Emma's reply. Alice snatched it back up eagerly, hoping for reassurance. But the message simply read, "Don't come here. I'll call Sin." Alice furrowed her brow in confusion. That was clearly not the message of someone doing just fine. She quickly typed back, "Why? What's going on?" This time the reply came faster. "Please just trust me, I can handle this. We'll explain later." Now Alice was really concerned. She fired back, "You're scaring me, Emma. I'm coming over tomorrow no matter what you say." She waited tensely for a response, but none came. With a frustrated huff, Alice stood up and headed to the kitchen to rinse out her wine glass, her mind spinning. Emma was clearly unraveling from the stress of Jacob's condition and isolation. Alice berated herself for not insisting sooner that Emma get help, or at least hire a live-in nurse. First thing in the morning, she decided, she would drive out there and figure out what was really going on. No more tiptoeing around the issue out of some misguided sensitivity. If her sister needed help, Alice would make sure she got it, no matter how difficult the conversation. She had to approach the situation delicately, though, or risk pushing Emma away even further. As Alice readied herself for bed that night, she contemplated how to get through to her sister. Make Emma understand that letting go of her stubborn self-reliance was the only path forward. Alice could only hope it wasn't already too late. But she wouldn't give up on Emma, no matter what darkness she faced. Starting tomorrow, Alice vowed to be the lifeline pulling her sister back from the brink, whether she wanted saving or not. Chapter 12. Emma jolted awake, momentarily confused by her surroundings. Early morning light filtered through the living room curtains. She was slumped on the couch, occult reference books spread across the coffee table in front of her. Groaning, she sat up slowly, rubbing the crick in her neck. She must have fallen asleep down here while taking notes. Emma blinked blearily at the grandfather clock. Almost 9, and the nurse would be arriving soon. She began gathering up the open books just as a knock sounded at the front door, followed by the sound of it creaking open. "Emma?" Alice's voice called out hesitantly. "It's just me." With a spike of alarm, Emma realized she had forgotten Alice was coming by. She shuffled the books together in a pile, but wasn't quick enough. Alice walked into the living room and paused, staring at the spread of occult titles on demonology, spirits, and witchcraft. "Doing some light reading, I see," Alice said, eyebrows raised. "Want to explain what's going on here?" Emma sank back down on the couch with a weary sigh. "No point trying to hide it anymore. You're going to think I'm crazy, but that portrait, the one you saw, it's possessed by some evil spirit. I have to find a way to destroy it before it hurts Jacob." Saying the words aloud to her sister finally unleashed the floodgates. Emma broke down sobbing as the events of the past few weeks came pouring out. The attic doorway, where she now noticed deep claw marks scored into the wood. Her growing dependence on stimulants and sedatives just to function. How she rarely slept anymore for fear of the watching portrait infiltrating her nightmares. "I can't bear for Jacob to suffer because of my failure to protect him," Emma choked out. "I'll do whatever it takes, even if it means losing my own soul." She raised her eyes hesitantly to meet Alice's, afraid of what she would see there. Disbelief? Fear? Pity? But instead, Emma was surprised to see in her sister's face only compassion and resolve. Alice moved to sit beside Emma on the couch, putting a comforting arm around her shoulders. "This darkness has consumed you for too long," she said gently. "You don't have to fight it alone anymore. I'm going to get you help." Emma let her body go limp against her sister's, the first fragile stirrings of hope taking root within her exhausted mind. Perhaps she had passed the point where she could save herself. But with Alice's aid, she could still defeat the forces menacing their doorstep. United at last, the two sisters could walk this road back to the light. Chapter 13. A cold autumn rain beat against the windows as Emma sat curled in the armchair near the fireplace. The hypnotic sound of water hitting glass threatened to lull her into much-needed sleep, but rest would not come easy. She stared numbly at the prescription bottle on the table beside her. The strong sedatives provided brief respite from the gnawing anxiety, though left her feeling sluggish and hungover. A fair trade-off, Emma justified to herself. The alternative was no sleep at all. The paranoia had only grown more oppressive since revealing everything to Alice 2 weeks prior. Her sister had urged Emma to leave the house for a while, insisting a change of scenery would provide perspective. But Emma refused to leave Jacob unprotected. She hadn't even allowed Alice to move the portrait from the attic yet, some irrational fear cautioning against it. Though she noticed Alice now eyed the attic door warily during visits, no longer dismissing Emma's warnings completely. With a weary sigh, Emma rose from the chair and shuffled to the kitchen. She had taken to burning candles and incense constantly to cleanse the home's energy, though it provided only fleeting comfort. As she lit a stick of sandalwood incense now, she noticed the herbs needed restocking. Emma located her raincoat and boots by the door. The occult shop in town supplied what she needed. She would call in a prescription refill while there too. The gravel drive had become a muddy river under the downpour as Emma drove slowly into town. Storefronts glowed warmly through the gloom as she parked along the main street. With her head ducked against the rain, she hurried down the sidewalk to the incense shop tucked below street level. A bell chimed softly as she entered the cramped space. The air hung heavy with the cloying scents of herbs and candles. New Age music played softly in the background as Emma gathered the supplies into her basket. She brought them to the counter where the owner, a willowy woman in colorful flowing garments, rang her up silently, peering intently at Emma with kohl-rimmed eyes the whole time. Her business complete, Emma hurried back through the rain to her car, feeling the woman's penetrating gaze following her the whole way. Shaking off the unsettled feeling, she drove just down the street to the pharmacy next. While waiting for them to fill the prescription, Emma paced the narrow aisles restlessly. She paused by the cold medicines, considering buying some NyQuil to help induce drowsiness, when suddenly all the overhead lights flickered off, plunging the store into darkness. Emma froze, heartbeat accelerating. A few people nearby gasped in surprise. Then the backup generator kicked on, restoring the lights. Emma exhaled shakily, glancing around as people laughed it off. Just a power outage, nothing sinister. When the pharmacist called her name, Emma collected the prescription hurriedly, declining a bag. She needed to escape the cloying confines of the store, the fluorescent lights and piped-in music suddenly grating. Outside, the rain had tapered off to a drizzle. Emma strode quickly to her car, keeping her head down to avoid the few people she passed. Slipping silently down side streets in the deepening dusk, she embraced the concealing gloom. There was comfort in the shadows that she couldn't find under harsh electric lights anymore. As she turned down the long drive leading out to the isolated farmhouse, Emma felt her pulse slow in relief. Out here, away from the town's watchful eyes, she could shed her frayed persona, trying desperately to appear normal. Here she could abandon herself wholly to the rituals and research that consumed her. Night descended fully by the time she arrived home, the old house nothing but a dark silhouette against the cloudy sky. But within those shadowy walls, she would delve even deeper into the darkness. Submerging herself fully was the only way to save Jacob now. With the creaking of the front door, Emma sealed her descent across the threshold into the land of ghosts. No turning back now from this necessary torment. She would walk boldly amongst the shades and emerge into the light once more with her husband. Or never resurface at all. Chapter 14. Cold rain lashed the windows as Emma sat tensely at the kitchen table, clutching a cup of tea. The wind rattled the old farmhouse, as if seeking a way inside. Emma stared into the steaming mug, trying to quiet her racing mind. Tonight the waiting would finally be over. After endless rituals, cleansings, and devouring every piece of occult lore she could find, Emma was ready. Ready to destroy the malevolent portrait that continued tormenting their home. The time had come to take back this house for the living. To cast out the sinister presence, leeching Jacob's vitality. Emma glanced at the clock. 11:30 p.m., just 30 minutes to go. At the stroke of midnight, she would venture into the attic and do what must be done. Every night for a week she had consecrated the ritual space, drew chalk circles on the floor, burned sage and incense until she stopped coughing. If the books held true, the witching hour would render the portrait vulnerable to destruction by her hand. Emma tensed as another violent gust of wind battered the side of the house. Intermixed with the howling, she thought she could hear the attic floorboards creaking over her head, as if some presence were pacing impatiently, awaiting the imminent confrontation. Her eyes drifted to the kitchen knife on the table. Never before had she imagined herself capable of slashing a canvas to shreds. But she would channel every ounce of rage and protective instinct into the act. For Jacob, she reminded herself, taking a deep, steadying breath. Everything was for him. At a quarter to midnight, Emma slowly ascended the groaning staircase. Her candle's flame quivered in the drafts threading the old house. Shadows seemed to press at her from all sides as she reached the attic door. Emma's pulse hammered in her ears. No turning back now. With trembling hands, she turned the handle and nudged the door open. The attic stood cloaked in gloom, aside from her lone flickering candle. Shadows danced across the rafters as she moved further inside, leaving the door wide open behind her. Step by measured step, Emma approached the far corner until the covered object came into view. She reached out a quaking hand and drew the sheet back, revealing the portrait of Jacob beneath. His painted eyes glinted in the candlelight. Emma stepped into the chalk circle and turned to fully face the malignant portrait. As the clock struck midnight, she raised the glinting knife above her head with both hands. "This ends tonight," she declared through gritted teeth. Eyes blazing with fury, Emma brought the blade slashing down across the canvas again and again, shattering the painted illusion of Jacob. A howling, as from the deepest pits of hell, rent the silence as viscous fluid seeped from the shredded portrait. Panting and splattered with paint, Emma dropped the knife. "Go back to the shadows where you belong, demon," she cried. "You have no power here anymore." As her words faded, an unearthly wailing filled the attic. Emma shielded her face as a violent wind whipped her hair, extinguishing the candle. The open attic door slammed shut, sealing her alone in darkness with the unseen entity. Emma clenched her fists, standing firm. The battle was only just beginning. Chapter 15. A heavy stillness settled over the attic, permeated only by Emma's ragged breathing. She blinked against the darkness, straining to see anything in the pitch black. Had she succeeded in banishing the evil spirit that inhabited the portrait? Emma's pulse pounded as she remained rooted in place within the invisible chalk circle. She hardly dared move a muscle as the silent seconds crawled by, half expecting a demonic entity to materialize out of the gloom at any second. But no attack came as the quiet minutes ticked on. Cautiously, Emma shuffled forward with one arm outstretched until her fingers met the rough wood of the attic wall. Feeling her way along, she managed to reach the door and wrench it open manually, the antique metal latch cold under her clammy hand. Emma hurried, thankfully, out of the lightless attic and down to the kitchen, nearly sobbing in relief. With trembling hands, she lit a match and candle, bathing the room in a warm, steadying glow. The familiar surroundings helped slow her frantic heartbeat. She collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands as reaction set in. "My God, what have I become?" Emma thought, a wave of shame crashing over her. Obsessing for weeks over a haunted painting, scarring the attic walls with bizarre symbols, tearing a canvas to bits in a crazed midnight ritual, it all seemed the actions of a madwoman, now in the calm light of a single candle flame. Perhaps the portrait had never been possessed at all, but merely a product of her unraveling psyche. After all, who else had witnessed the disturbing phenomena? Only Alice briefly, and Emma had influenced her perception. A sob escaped Emma's throat as the enormity of her self-delusion weighed down on her. She had driven herself to the brink of insanity, convinced that the fate of their very souls hung in the balance. But the real threat was not some demon, it was her own devolving mind. And yet, could she be certain? Had tonight truly vanquished the evil, or merely subdued it for now? Cold dread tingled Emma's spine. What if she let her guard down, only for the entity to return seeking vengeance? She could almost feel its malignant gaze upon her now, emanating from the ruined portrait overhead. No, she couldn't trust her perceptions, Emma reminded herself, taking a deep, steadying breath. Paranoia and darkness still clouded her thoughts. She needed help to find clarity through medication, therapy, whatever it took to regain sanity. Only then could she determine what threats were real and which had lurked solely in her mind. Until she achieved inner harmony once more, Emma vowed not to make another move against the portrait, real or imagined. Her weary mind and body needed rest tonight, though she knew peace would not come easily. With the dawn, she could begin the ascent back into the light. Chapter 16. Watery autumn sunlight filtered into the bedroom, gradually stirring Emma from a fitful sleep. She blinked slowly, feeling the familiar ache of exhaustion in both body and spirit. Turning her head, she saw Jacob lying in his usual motionless repose beneath the patchwork quilt. Seeing his tranquil face sent a bittersweet pang through Emma's heart. She envied his unawareness, asleep to the inner turmoil she wrestled with each moment. If only the path forward could be as simple and clear to her as breathing was for him. With a soft groan, Emma sat up, the previous night's events returning to her in a rush. She raked her fingers back through her disheveled hair. The crazed ritual with the portrait felt like a bizarre dream in the sane morning light. But the attic damage would still be up there, concrete evidence of her unraveling psyche. She rose slowly, limbs heavy and graceless. Emma shuffled to the bathroom, avoiding her reflection in the mirror as she washed her ashen face and brushed her teeth. She then dressed in an oversized sweater and yoga pants, pulling her messy hair into a bun. After brewing a pot of coffee, Emma sank down at the kitchen table with her head in her hands. She recalled the vow she'd made to herself last night: no more rash actions without clarity. Her sanity and Jacob's safety depended on moving ahead thoughtfully and cautiously. First, she would call the counselor Alice had recommended to start therapy sessions. She would be honest about her experiences with the portrait, not downplaying the vivid hallucinations. Getting her mental health back on solid ground needed to be the priority. Next, she would bring in spiritual help, consulting the local priest about banishing evil from their home and property, whether that evil was flesh and blood or existed only in her imagination. Focusing on her faith would provide comfort and guidance. Most importantly, Emma vowed not to isolate herself any longer. She needed the human connection Alice and other loved ones could provide. She would let them help shoulder this burden rather than shutting them out. Glancing at the clock, Emma took a steadying breath before picking up the phone to make the first call. She had to believe she wasn't past the point of no return, that the real Emma still lingered beneath the oppressive darkness. But with sustained effort and support, she could once more reclaim the light within. Today marked the first step forward. Chapter 17. A blustery November wind rattled the bare tree branches as Emma sat rigidly on the living room sofa. She watched the minutes tick by on the antique grandfather clock, counting the chimes marking each hour. Late afternoon was slowly fading to evening outside. Emma clutched her cell phone tightly in her clammy hand. Alice would be calling any minute to check in, just as she had done daily since Emma started therapy sessions earlier in the week. She dreaded telling Alice what was happening tonight. Midnight was approaching rapidly. Trying to steady her nerves, Emma rose and lit a stick of calming lavender incense on the mantel. She had scrubbed the entire house today with sage, preparing for the priest's imminent visit. But purifying salts lining the doorway and windowsills could only offer so much protection from what lurked upstairs. At the stroke of 6 chimes, Emma's cell phone rang, making her flinch. With a deep breath, she answered. "Hi, Alice. "Hey, there you are. How are things today?" Her sister's cheerful voice helped slow Emma's racing pulse. "I'm all right. Father Thomas is actually coming by this evening to bless the house." She hesitated. "And to assess the problematic attic situation." Alice was silent for a beat. "That's good you're getting help, but Emma, please be careful." "I will, I promise," Emma said. But inwardly, she knew real danger awaited tonight. She could already feel the malevolent energy stirring, a deep, marrow-chilling cold permeating the house. All day she had wrestled with herself, wondering whether to flee, to beg Alice to come stay the night, anything to avoid what the gathering darkness portended. But no, Emma knew this might be her last chance to eliminate the threat once and for all, before her sanity completely crumbled under the onslaught. After extracting as many reassurances from Emma as she could, Alice reluctantly ended the call. Twilight shadows crept across the floor, moving ever closer to where Emma sat statue still. At 1:45, flashing headlights cut through the darkness signaled Father Thomas's arrival. Emma took one last deep breath, then went to let him in. The priest's time-worn face was grim as they ascended to the second floor together. Emma opened the attic door slowly, allowing his prayer book and relics to enter first. The temperature dropped palpably as they stepped inside. Moonlight through the open window illuminated the portrait's shredded canvas on the floor. Dark stains surrounding it looked horribly like blood. Father Thomas began reciting prayers of protection in Latin, sprinkling holy water. The wind picked up violently, howling through the rafters. The battle for salvation was at hand. Chapter 18. Emma stood just outside the attic threshold, clutching her rosary tightly as Father Thomas began the ritual inside. She whispered desperate prayers under her breath along with him, struggling to steady her raging heartbeat. The plan was for the priest to evoke and extinguish the demonic spirit inhabiting the portrait, banishing it back to hell. Meanwhile, Emma would focus on shielding Jacob, keeping constant vigil over his bedroom just feet away. Protecting his vulnerable soul was all that mattered now. She flinched as an unearthly howl tore through the stillness upstairs, accompanied by the screech of splintering wood. The priest shouted Latin incantations over the evil entity's screams, the spiritual weaponry hitting their mark. Emma's pulse raced, imagining the battle for deliverance unseen just over her head. Turning from the attic, Emma rushed into Jacob's bedroom, sealing the door behind her. If the exorcism failed, she would accept her fate, but not let the demon take Jacob too. She hurried to his bedside, clasping his limp hand in both of her own. For a fleeting moment, his eyelashes seemed to flutter. "I'm here, my love, right beside you," Emma murmured, smoothing back his hair. She knelt on the floor, forehead pressed against the quilt's edge. "Just hold on." The walls and floorboards shuddered, as if in the throes of a violent quake. A thunderous crashing sound followed by silence. Emma held her breath, listening intently. Heavy footsteps descended the attic stairs towards the bedroom. She leapt up, placing herself between Jacob and the approaching entity. The doorknob began to rattle violently. Emma braced herself, brandishing her rosary like a weapon as the door suddenly burst open. Father Thomas stood silhouetted in the doorway, clothes rumpled and hair disheveled. Behind him, all was darkness. The exorcism had succeeded. Emma's knees nearly buckled in relief. The priest helped her into a chair, his strong hands grasping her shoulders. "It's over now, child. The darkness has no power here anymore." Emma could only nod, tears spilling down her cheeks. As the adrenaline rush faded, she registered vaguely the smell of smoke hanging in the air. With the evil vanquished, she had no energy left to contain the blaze spilling from the attic. But she felt no fear watching the hungry flames engulf the old farmhouse. No material possession mattered, just her husband's enduring soul. They made it safely outside to await the fire crews. In the glow of the burning home, Jacob's eyes opened briefly, seeming to look right at her. Emma knew then that their spirits too had been set free to start anew. Chapter 19. A light snow fell steadily outside the arched chapel windows. Emma sat in one of the front pews, gazing blankly at the rows of flickering votive candles. She found solace in the tranquil sanctuary, a respite from the chaos of recent weeks. In the month since the fire ravaged their home, life had become a blur of insurance claims, finding temporary lodging, and overseeing Jacob's care in the rehabilitation wing of a nursing home. The firm diagnosis of advancing Parkinson's gave context for his deteriorating health. She held on to hope the physical therapy would help. But not knowing the true cause of the fire remained a gnawing loose end. Faulty old wiring had been deemed the culprit. Emma couldn't bring herself to mention the likely real origins, a deranged ritual she had enacted while in the grips of madness. The truth threatened to undo the tenuous stability she had fought so hard to regain. Even her therapist assured Emma that acknowledging the paranormal realities she had experienced would undermine progress. Emma wanted desperately to believe the haunting events were merely delusions. Letting go of the trauma was key to moving forward in peace. But was willful ignorance wise? Wouldn't confronting unsettling truths, however difficult, be the only way to definitively close this chapter? Otherwise, doubts would continue plaguing her. Emma worried peace of mind would remain elusive so long as any lingering questions stayed unanswered. The chapel's heavy wooden doors groaned open then, pulling Emma from her reverie. She looked over her shoulder to see Father Thomas entering, carrying a large leather-bound book. He paused when he noticed her. "Good morning, Emma," seeking some serenity. She stood to greet him. "Trying to clear my head. Yes, do you have a minute to talk?" They settled into a pew together. Emma unburdened her lingering uncertainties. The priest listened silently until she finished. "You know, many never fully comprehend the forces encountered in exorcisms," he said carefully. "But faith requires accepting that which lies beyond our understanding. What matters now is looking ahead, not behind." His soothing words lifted the last shadow from Emma's spirit. She felt truly ready to release the past and step wholly into the future now. The last remnants of darkness fell away, and Emma saw the path forward, bathed in light. With a grateful heart, she thanked Father Thomas for the guidance. Bidding him farewell, Emma stepped outside into the softly falling snow. The swirling flakes kissed her cheeks, cold and tingling. She gazed up at the muted gray sky, a sense of peace settling over her that had evaded for so long. Emma wandered through the tranquil village, enjoying the beauty of the fresh snowfall clinging to the trees and rooftops. The sight sparked a nearly forgotten warmth inside appreciation for the simple gifts around her. Gifts like life and family that she had stopped noticing while consumed by her inner turmoil. She stopped at a cheery storefront and purchased paints, brushes, and a canvas, feeling newly inspired by the world's loveliness. Her hands had once created beauty alongside ugliness. Perhaps now they could help spread more light. Arriving back at the little cottage she and Jacob had moved into, Emma shed her coat and brought the art supplies upstairs to the spare bedroom. Standing before the blank canvas, she closed her eyes for a moment, inviting inspiration to flow through her. With graceful strokes, Emma began coaxing the image in her mind's eye out into reality. A vivid scene took shape: their cozy new home, nestled in the peaceful woodlands, smoke twirling from the chimney, a warm glow in each window. Every brushstroke infused the work with Emma's rekindled faith, hope, and gratitude. By the time pale violet dusk settled outside, the painting felt complete. Emma set down her palette and stepped back, feeling tears pool in her eyes. The act of creating had released the last bindings from her trauma. Here was the life she intended to live now, one of joy and light, no matter the shadows that may come. With her revelation still glowing softly within, Emma cleaned her brushes and went downstairs to prepare dinner. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready now to greet each one with an open heart. The darkness could not touch her as long as it illuminated the beauty hiding within. Chapter 20. Pale winter light filtered into the physical therapy room. Emma sat observing Jacob's session, trying to remain upbeat. But seeing his feeble attempts to grasp the colorful foam blocks arranged before him broke her heart. The therapists assured her that the neurological stimulation activities provided benefits. But after weeks of sessions, Emma struggled to stay hopeful. She longed to see a flicker of the vibrant man she had known in those vacant eyes. Some hint he still lingered within the broken shell. When the session ended, Emma helped the aide wheel Jacob back to his stark hospital room. He stared silently ahead as she settled him into the adjustable bed. "I brought some homemade soup for your lunch today," Emma said brightly, spooning the broth and vegetables to his unmoving lips. Jacob showed no indication he even tasted the meal. Emma sank down into the chair beside his bed with a heavy sigh. The doctors claimed maintaining a familiar routine helped maintain neurons in the brain. But the endless repetitive days were taking their toll on her own mental state. She missed having someone to truly connect with, losses and time isolating her from most friends. A tentative knock drew Emma's gaze to the open door. Alice stepped halfway into the room with a sympathetic smile. "Got time for a visit?" Emma sat up straighter, immediately cheered by her sister's presence. She listened intently as Alice caught her up on work gossip and their parents' latest antics, savoring this taste of a normal life. When Alice finally glanced at her phone and said she should get going, Emma's heart sank. The thought of returning to the monotony of her solo vigil overwhelmed her. Words spilled out of her mouth unplanned. "Why don't you stay with us a while at the cottage?" Emma held her breath, shocked at her own bold request. "It's just, I could really use the company." Alice looked stunned for a moment, but then her face softened into an understanding smile. "Of course, a change of scenery would be nice. I'd love to stay with you both." Relief washed over Emma as they hugged. She knew the arrangement might prove challenging. Alice had a busy life, and Emma had become accustomed to her rituals. But having her sister's warm, caring presence could make all the difference in their bleak world. This family reconnection came long overdue. Emma felt certain that together, they could find a way forward out of the darkness of grief and isolation. Though the future remained daunting, Emma was no longer resigned to facing it alone. Chapter 21. Early spring sunlight streamed through the windows of the cozy cottage. In the kitchen, Emma sliced an apple pie she had just pulled from the oven, releasing an evocative cinnamon aroma. She prepared 2 plates and carried them into the sunroom, where Alice sat reading in an oversized armchair. "Pie delivery," Emma announced, placing a slice and mug of coffee on the side table. Alice looked up from her novel with a grin. "Ooh, amazing. Your baking is out of this world." She took an eager bite of the warm pie, closing her eyes in bliss. "Seriously, you could sell these." Emma waved off the compliment, even as she felt a spark of pride. Creating nourishing food made her days feel productive in a small way. "Well, you deserve it for getting that bookshelf built." Alice had proven an immensely helpful housemate over the past 2 months since moving in. Beyond providing invaluable company, she contributed physically around the cottage and helped research additional treatment options for Jacob. Her upbeat presence made each day feel brighter. Of course, there had been adjustments required too. The sisters had the occasional minor argument or got on each other's nerves, which was to be expected. Emma struggled at times with having her structured routine disrupted, but the benefits far outweighed any hassles. For the first time in years, she felt she had a true partner. After washing up from lunch, they got ready to visit Jacob at the rehab center. Emma always appreciated Alice accompanying her, so the nurses had someone else to speak with. It made the whole endeavor feel less solitary. Alice also seemed to have a knack for getting just the tiniest flicker of reaction out of Jacob, squeezing his hand or saying something that caused his eyelashes to flutter. Like she was pulling him back into the world bit by bit through sheer power of will. On the drive home later, Emma reached over to give Alice's hand an affectionate squeeze. "Thank you," she said simply. Alice just smiled. With her sister's presence breathing new life into their days, Emma felt able for the first time to envision a positive path forward out the darkness of the past year. Each halting step brought Sisyphean effort, but together she and Alice could shoulder the load a little easier. Chapter 22. A gentle spring rain pattered against the windows as Emma sat curled up on the sofa with a blanket and book. The rich scent of vegetable stew simmered from the slow cooker in the kitchen. The domestic sounds and smells soothed Emma's spirit. She smiled faintly hearing Alice arrive home from work, the front door banging shut against the wind. It amazed Emma how quickly her sister's presence had come to feel so familiar here. "Honey, I'm home," Alice called out theatrically as she breezed into the living room. Emma chuckled, glad to see Alice's irrepressible spirit hadn't waned at all these past months living here. "How was the salt mine today?" she joked. Alice flopped down dramatically into an armchair with a weary sigh. "Oh, just chipping away." They exchanged amused grins. Emma cherished these easy moments together, reminiscent of childhood. She knew eventually the time would come for Alice to move on and resume her own independent life. But they would relish this time, for however long it lasted. Later in the evening, Emma went through the comforting bedtime routine of preparing Jacob for sleep, changing his clothes, turning him to avoid sores, tucking the blankets snugly around him. As she leaned over to turn out the bedside lamp, his eyes opened slightly and seemed to fix on her face. They gazed at one another silently for a few heartbeats before his eyes slid closed again. But in that wordless exchange, Emma thought she glimpsed the man she loved still dwelling somewhere deep within. It was enough to reignite her latent hopes. Jacob was in there, wanting to break free of the prison his own body had become. She just had to keep trying to reach him. Emma stepped out into the moonlit hallway, heart brimming with renewed faith. They would have more moments like this, more signs of gradual progress. No matter how long and weary the road ahead, she would walk it faithfully at his side. Stepping outside into the night's gentle breeze, Emma raised her face skyward. The darkness which had once threatened to consume their lives had lost its power. Light still broke through if you had eyes to see it. And she knew now their love would outlast any shadow. The end.